Okay, I get to do updates now. Well, welcome to our advisory committee. A couple things before we get into the kind of usual updates. Actually, let me turn this. Just being a videographer as well. We're short-handed today. One is that we've the budget update. For those of you that were at the LSPA meeting on Tuesday night, you did hear the good news that the budget this year has been good. It's above what would be maintenance level, which would indicate that we'd be, depending upon the outcome of decisions at the Executive Office of Administration and Finance, it looks like we will be able, as a department, to be hiring some staff this year. Not only backfilling some of the old positions, but also adding new, real additional bodies. So the message there is that, one, if you know of particularly young people starting out in the industry or with a few years of experience that would be interested in their good, send them along to us because, or at least have them check the website because there will be opportunities this fall. Final decisions about the numbers of how many we can hire still kind of working its way through the bureaucracy that we have to deal not only with decisions about dollars, but FTE limits, kind of body limits that we have, and those have to be changed to reflect the money. And we have to make sure that not only the money will be available here this year, but that it gets, our baseline gets adjusted so that from that point on, it becomes a new baseline, the new normal going forward. And that's what the numbers from the Administration and Finance will establish. So everything is looking pretty good. And it's almost like we don't know how to react to this. Some of the focus for wayside cleanup in the is certainly adding more staff in the regional offices, and we are focusing on more emergency response staff and more auditing staff. Kind of two big priorities, although as you probably realize these days, everybody is a little bit of a jack of all trades. And, well, ER staff also do auditing. Audit staff do site management. But those are the primary focuses as they are our core activities responding to emergencies and conducting the audits that provide people confidence that the overall program is working as it should be. Yes? Right.
As it affects my students, will there be any funding for paid summer internships as opposed to volunteer summer internships?
I don't know anything specifically, but my first guess would be no. It is unfortunate, but my guess is that these things are set up in certain ways, and the details and everything that's behind all the hiring and the bureaucracy, human resources, I don't know anything about it. First forbid, I don't want to know anything about it. But I think it would be, I would imagine that it would be difficult to kind of switch them over from unpaid to paid. But we'll see. If it's going to happen in a year, it would happen this year, but probably not. Okay, so that's the good news. And this is interesting news. I'm not sure. Talking about PFAS, so we'll go over a couple topics that we have on the agenda every time we do this. Partly, and PFAS is partly because this is where we're spending a lot of our time, and I say that kind of personally, that I'm spending a lot of my time on PFAS, and the department as a whole is spending a lot of time on PFAS, not necessarily just waste site cleanup, but we're part of it. So This graphic is primarily just to remind me of what I want to talk about. And as you'll see, it becomes a Venn diagram, but it's not really a Venn diagram because the overlapping stuff is purely aesthetic and it doesn't mean anything. But PFAS, first kind of looking at it from the viewpoint of toxicity information. You know that we put out a guideline, a drinking water guideline, known as an ORSG, for the Office of Research and Standards Guideline, for the drinking water program in June of this year. It's 70 parts per trillion for the sum of 5 PFAS compounds. And don't ask me because I would have to look them up to tell you exactly which ones. I can't keep them straight. Mark, and you want to make sure that they're right, so I always look them up. So that's the primary thing. PFAS is moving very, 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 very quickly, as you know. So it came as only a minor surprise that a week or two after we put out our drinking water guideline, that ATSDR came out with their draft toxicity profile and draft reference doses for some PFAS compounds, which would indicate from their perspective, their point of view, their review of the toxicity information, that the levels of concern for PFAS would be well below the 70 parts per trillion. You go through the calculations, and depending upon what you put in the calculations, it comes out in the low teens levels. Yeah, somewhere around 12, 13. At least it's done the calculations. Depends on which one. So ATSAR comes out with data immediately after we came out with our 70 parts per trillion for the 5 compounds. Vermont, which had 20 parts per trillion for 2, modified theirs to be 20 parts per trillion for 5. So where we had been on the kind of cutting edge, at the moment, within a week or 2, we were back in the pack again in looking at how we deal with and react to reports of PFAS in drinking water. EPA, as a reminder, is looking at 70 parts per trillion for 2. So there's a matrix here, and I didn't include the matrix, but I have one, of kind of, you look across states, across countries, federal agencies, there are differences in what the concentrations of concern are, and there are differences in the number of compounds that are considered in that. And right now, at the 70 parts per trillion for 5, we're probably middle of the pack. But we are committed to continually look at new information as it comes out. And all I would say is that 70 parts per trillion for 5 is where we are today. And that may change because we are committed to continually looking at it and react accordingly. We have to keep up with the information that's coming. We're working, the guideline came out after ORS consulted with their Health Effects Advisory Committee, an external peer group that they use for peer review. Wendy Hyder-Burdett, who's here in spirit. Who's here in spirit, who will be watching. Yeah. She's teaching a class at the moment. And was not able to come. She sits on that committee as well as a number of other people.
So is there a plan to revisit that?
If in...
Oh, I'm sorry. Am I getting ahead? Sorry. If and when we revisit, as we feel we have enough information to consider changes, then it will go back again through the same process. And depending upon the timing, we have a reg package which is kind of slowly moving through the system, and I'm not going to say any more about that. But if timing allows, then any changes, when that reg package comes out, we want that to reflect where we stand at the moment. So moving targets is kind of the message for this, but if you consider all of the information that's coming out, it is unlikely that any of these numbers are going up. Just.
Can you add though, I mean, this is all national when you have reference in this circle?
Well, like I said, this is kind of meaningless as a circle, but.
No, I mean, this is specific items floating.
Yeah, I mean, EPA, I wanted to make sure that your EPA, all of this is going on nationally as well.
Right, but I was going to say, there's a lot of international information that you might want to consider.
There-
Australia certainly took a different tactic.
There is international information. ITRC has a very good summary of this with a table in there that summarizes all of that. That's actually, I use that to help you make that matrix that I'm not showing you. But next time. I thought this one was better. And then the question of standards. Okay, MCP standards, that's one piece of it. One of the other things that we may be considering, or an EPA is considering, is do the regulatory agencies go down the road of promulgating maximum concentration limits for drinking water? And there are a lot of pros and cons for doing that. Certainly, there have been calls nationally from, ranging from community groups who want standards because they're clearly enforceable, as opposed to EPA saying, well, it's a health advisory, Richard's advisory. And places like PRPs, like the Department of Defense, who would like one national standard consistently applied for planning purposes. So there's a wide range of people that actually are calling for standards, but that is a long-term process. Even if we do that, move ahead with it in the state, it's not something that's going to happen in a matter of months. At the federal level, there hasn't been a new MCL in decades. And I believe they had planned on promulgating an MCL for chloride, and they had made that decision in like 2006 or so, and we haven't seen it yet. So it's a long-term process. Okay, water supplies. This is where we're seeing most of it, and our focus for PFAS is primarily on drinking water. We're seeing in public water supplies, we're seeing in private water supplies. From the wayside cleanup perspective, our primary focus is in GW1 areas for current and future drinking water use. We've seen the UCMR reports and the data coming back from that. That doesn't give a full, complete picture of what we're seeing because the reporting limits for the UCMR project were relatively high. So one of the things that we're doing is going back, asking communities to request the data packages because some of the labs that had looked at it were able to achieve lower limits and have that data and can go back and report back the presence or absence and quantify levels at lower than the nominal reporting limits. So that's one thing to give us a better idea of what is out there. The good news about PFAS as opposed to 1,4-dioxane is that it is treatable. Granulated activated carbon is one of several possibilities, but they kind of standard treatment processes. So at least when it is discovered in a public or a private water supply, there are things that can be done. The downside of that, of course, is it costs money. But if that's the only thing you're worried about, rather than technical feasibility, you're one step further down the road. But money is a big issue. Anything else? Bottled water. Public and private wells. A public well has PFAS at elevated levels. One of the recommendations that we have is what are the tools that are available, I guess, would be a better way of putting it, is for people to drink bottled water, either voluntarily to voluntarily reduce their exposure, or for the community municipality to provide bottled water should people choose it. What's the question that then comes up? What's in the bottled water? And so
And it's spring water versus just the pure.
So a couple things are happening with this. One, from the wayside cleanup perspective, and I think we talked about this previously, is that if wayside cleanup is providing bottled water for anything, whether it's PFAS, and we've done that out of Westfield, for example, or we provide bottled water for other contaminants in other situations, we are formally instituting the policy that we request the latest sampling data from the bottler, which generally mirrors the. Well, getting ahead
ahead of me again. She's good, but she just let Susan do this.
Too much coffee.
That will focus, as Susan was about to point out, that sampling data will focus on chemicals for which there are MCLs. So for those situations where we are providing bottled water because of a gasoline release and there's benzene in the water, and that happens, that's sufficient. It's also something that we want to know, regardless of whether it provides all the answers, but to the extent that it doesn't answer the question of the particular contaminant we're concerned about, and PFAS would be one, 1,4-dioxane is another. We will and have sampled the water that we're providing to the residents. And we'll do that on an annual basis if it goes on for a longer period of time. And we make that publicly available so that we can assure the residents that at least this is all snapshots in time, and we're not promising anything more than that for the wayside cleanup portion of this. It's a snapshot in time of this is what we're giving you, and this is what we have found in the water.
So
the
DEP, can I just paraphrase what you just said?
Sure.
Okay. So DEP has, just so I get it right, DEP is going to analyze bottled water for any constituents that are not on the MCL list that they already would have had chemical contaminant data from the vendor, for which they're concerned about at the site. Was that right?
Yes. I think the only modification of that, or clarification, is that we will be sampling the bottled water that we are providing through our vendor. We are not doing random sampling of bottled water. We are not doing a comprehensive bottled water assessment. This is to answer the question when we are providing bottled water to an affected resident, and they ask the question, is this any better than what's coming out of the tap? We'll be able to answer that. Let me finish. There's a flip side of this coin, which I think you'll like. But,
By default, it's the number.
so the next question is, particularly for the public water supplies that might be contaminated, maybe less than the 70 parts per trillion, but what part of the recommendations are that if somebody chooses to lower their exposure, even though that they may want to choose bottled water, this doesn't help because DEP is not providing the bottled water in this case. It's just, you might want to choose bottled water. So, and the question then becomes, is that any better? So what we have done, and where we've begun a process, we have sent out letters to water bottlers in Massachusetts asking them to sample for PFAS. And if they send us their results, we will post those results publicly on DEP's website.
Where?
I believe it's under the drinking water program, but when we go through all of this and for the advisory committee website, where we post the link to the video and all of that, we'll have a link to that.
You don't have it yet?
I believe they have at least 2, if not 3, results back from that.
So just to follow that up, if there is a site where the PRP is providing bottled water to people that have potentially contaminated drinking private wells, are you requiring the PRP to test the bottled water?
No.
Okay.
We would recommend it. We think it's a good idea. I think it's a small cost to go a long way to allaying people's fears, but it is not part of the regulatory requirements. And similarly, the drinking water program does not regulate bottled water. Mass Department of Public Health has some regulatory hooks in there. There are different requirements if they're just selling bottled water in Massachusetts versus bottling it here.
But within that context, the immediate and first thing we could do was ask for this voluntary sampling and reporting. And that's what's being done. Janine, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, so it's those bottled water suppliers who bottle their water, get their water from Massachusetts sources? Is that the? No. What's the universe?
I believe the universe for which the letters went out are the. She's already found it, so you can Google it and easily find it. Our website works really well with search engines. You just can't find it if you go looking for it. The letters went out, I believe, to bottlers in state, because those are, we have, the Department of Public Health has a list of those because they regulate those bottlers more directly. And there's a wider range of people that sell that it's important. Again, it's the universe that we can address.
Thanks.
Okay, so that's cool, I thought. The tanker truck thing, ignore that, because that really belongs to this one. Yeah. 21E sites, this is more kind of along what you guys are more directly concerned about. Some of the things that are coming up here, as we discover PFAS sites, the majority of them have come from the public water supply sampling. And then the question becomes, okay, where is the PFAS actually coming from? It's never the water supplier that is the PRP in these cases, at least not yet. So wayside cleanup is the Bureau program that then does the site discovery, the source discovery, to try to figure out where it's coming from. In most cases, as you know, it's been pretty obvious. If you have a contaminated public water supply at Devon's, the first place you would look would perhaps be the Army operations that took place at the former Fort Devon's. And there's a logic there that has borne itself out. Westfield, we have the Air National Guard base there. The first contaminated well that was discovered was a well that was right at the foot of the runway, very close to the base. So those are fairly obvious ones. There are others that are less obvious, where Wayside Cleanup has issued requests for information to potential upgrade in sources, and depending upon the responses we get back, would issue notices of responsibility and welcome them into the 21E process. And that has worked both down in Barnstable and in Hudson, where we have different sources that are now conducting site assessment activities, and in the case of Hudson, sampling private wells as well, in addition to the other work.
In an effort to try and keep as many remaining horses in the barn as possible, has there been other coordination in terms of site inspections of, say, fire departments, things like that, where they may have some material that's been left over that you don't want released?
Oh, wait, we'll get there. If you think that there should be symmetry in these diagrams, just wait. So 21E sites, one of the things that a couple things that have come up, the federal facilities and Superfund sites are some of the major sources of contamination here, and as you could probably imagine and know from your own experience, working with EPA at Superfund sites, working with DOD for a variety, and within DOD, the different services have their own interesting and unique challenges, not the least of which is that in some cases there is sovereign immunity, or the belief that there is sovereign immunity, and where there are differences in regulatory criteria, 70 for 2 PFAS versus 70 for 5 PFAS, versus Vermont, I'm sure, is dealing with issues, the 70 versus 20, kind of figuring out what has to be done what levels have to be reacted to, and the timing of it. The state is more nimble, perhaps, than some of the federal agencies. So we're working with that on a day-to-day basis, trying to figure out the best way to proceed and how to do it. And in cases where perhaps DOD has not moved as quickly as we would like, DEP has gone out and done the sampling. Westfield, we sampled over 80 private wells and provided point of entry treatment systems for a handful of homes because the Air National Guard was not reacting quickly enough to that for reasons that they articulated. There are things like, those are big obvious ones. There are what concerns us, and we don't quite have a handle on yet, are things like the tanker truck rollovers, where you have gasoline tanker rollover. What's the first thing that a fire department will do? You know, if it's not on fire already, great. You cover it with foam so that it doesn't catch on fire. That foam often is AFFF, which is used to be full of 8-chain perfluorinated compounds, and we have a case down on the Cape where a couple, just 2 tanker trucks led to contaminated groundwater, downgrading impacts that we're still dealing with in contaminated water supplies. And that's scary because that means that anywhere there has been an accident, you could potentially have a PFAS problem. It might be localized, you know, it might be one accident, one truck turnover, but the localized effect could be huge. And if it's someplace down on the Cape where the groundwater moves quickly and there's no attenuation because it's all sand and gravel, then it might not even be localized from that one release. And that's, in some ways, that's a lot scarier than the large military bases, which may have a big problem, but you're more likely to know about it and be able to do something about it. So that's one of the things that we are concerned about. We'll do that. Then we get to the AFFF. And the things that we're going to add here is primarily the take-back program. That kind of getting to your point, there are stockpiles of the old bad AFFF still out there. And in fact, you know, not only did local firefighter companies, you know, municipalities buy it and they use it, but we have cases where oil terminals, for example, had big stockpiles of the stuff, and they decided to be good corporate environmentalists and switch it out and get the better, the newer, shorter chain version of it. So what did they do with the old stockpiles? Went around, they put it in a big truck, went around to the local fire departments, and poured it into every 5-gallon bucket that they could find. Which was a boon to the fire departments. They have, this is the good stuff. This is the military spec firefighting foam. So they wanted it. It's expensive stuff. So what we have done is working with the fire services folks in public safety, we've offered to run a take-back program where our contractors have gone around to local fire stations and have collected these 5-gallon buckets and larger. But we have a picture somewhere of a collection of a variety of different buckets that were just filled up with this stuff. And so it's been collected and sent off to incinerators to be burned. So we're collecting and disposing of the material, and so far we've done about 7,000 gallons of it and got it out. Yes.
I think that's a terrific program. Follow-up, firefighting academies in particular that are basically doing test burns and have used this stuff in the past. Are you looking at that as potential sources of water supply contamination?
That's a more complicated question than it first seems, but we have number of answers. One, yes, they are potential sources. And let me give you kind of two extremes, or two ends of it. One, when Barnstable was discovered to have elevated levels of PFAS in UCMR3, one of the obvious upgraded potential sources for that was the Barnstable fire training, which has been confirmed to have PFAS contamination of groundwater plume leading from there directly to the wells, which are not very far from it. And we are working with them. They're in the process of conducting an immediate response action to deal with some aspects of that. They have removed soil, they've done some source elimination, so we continue to work with them on that. Interesting note, that was also one of the cases where we issued a request for information for the Barnstable Airport, which is also nearby, and which also used AFFF, and which also received a notice of responsibility, and we believe that they had contributed to the contamination. So it wasn't just, we didn't just look at the fire training academy, we're trying to keep an open mind. On the other hand, we've met with the officials at Stowe, which is a state-run fire training facility, and I'm not going to get the dates right, but I believe in the late 1980s or the early 1990s, the facility was renovated and they instituted a water collection and reuse system. So rather than, whatever was used there, rather than contributing to groundwater contamination, the water was taken up and reused and collected, which is a better, in general, a better environmental approach. Whether you're concerned about in Barnstable, we've had successive issues with petroleum that was used to start the burns. That affected the Barnstable wells. It was then followed by perchlorate because they used to burn old road flares there. Perchlorate affected the Barnstable wells, so it wasn't surprising when PFAS then was found to have wells. We haven't had the same issues with Stowe, although the facility in Stowe, to be clear, is in an area where there are other potential sources, including an industrial source, and the separate annex, the old Army facility. So there are, it's not to say that that area is PFAS free, and one of the things we want to do is be clear to ourselves and everybody else what potential role, if any, the firefighting academy had. But their practices, there's a range of practices which would lead to different outcomes.
So just because of those practices, you're not going to eliminate them as a potential, you're still going to look at them a little further?
I think it's an ongoing process. In meeting with them, one of the things that they pointed out, and I find interesting, is in general, in training, they don't use AFFF for the simple reason, as I said before, it's the good stuff. It's expensive, it's military spec. But, so for the training that they run and foam that they use, they essentially use dishwashing liquid to create the foam. But there are also groups that come and use the facilities and bring their own equipment, bring their own foam, and so they can't, nobody could rule out entirely that AFFF was never used there, because they can't speak for local firefighting companies that come in, and if they're one of the units that got a 5-gallon bucket for free, then the cost element of it isn't going to prevent them from using it. It was free. So you can never completely rule it out, and it's something that we will continue to keep in mind, and it's not definitive that there was no contamination. But that's the sort of thing that we're thinking of. And then there are, as you probably have heard, there are potential impacts to food, to composting, waste, whether it's paper sludge compost where you're using treated paper. There are a lot of other potential sources out there that we will be continuing to kind of keep an eye on and investigate, and there may be new issues and new concerns and new sources that will come down the line. So we'll try to keep everybody involved. And then the last thing, the drones, has absolutely nothing to do with PFAS. So that's another list, just to make sure that I covered everything. And what we're doing that time, I'm probably behind. Oh, a little over.
So-
Okay, so TC, we're continuing with the TCE stuff. Just to reassure everybody that we continue to work on the TCE sites, Susan. And a couple things, I'll keep this part of it short, but the slides will be up. A couple things to point out that I find interesting. One is the Western region is kind of pretty much done with going through their review, and they feel confident. They're working on the last sites. The one that they find continuing to be interesting is the former Beasley-Bendick site in Greenfield. Partly because the town of Greenfield is interested in redevelopment of this property, and there are residents that are potentially affected by it. So that's one that they're still spending a lot of time on. But overall, the Western region feels pretty confident that they've worked through what they currently know, which is not to say that there aren't going to be new old sites that come forward. It will continue to be an ongoing process for everybody, including the Western region. And to underscore that, the Central region, this is kind of what they have been doing during their summer vacation. They've been working on a school, a high school in Worcester, that earlier in the summer, there was work being done by an adjacent industrial company on an Apple issue, and TCE was rediscovered, I would say. Prior work had been done years ago, and levels between 2 and 17 micrograms per cubic meter. So in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't screaming levels, but this was a school. This school supposedly had a subslab system already installed. So there's a question of how effective it was, and whether the plume was adequately described. Interesting thing, this plume, after it went underneath the school, it also ended up going underneath an office building right beside the school, and the office building it went right under Mark Bowley's office, who is our deputy regional director in the Central Region, just to kind of put this in context. We have indoor air data for our Central Regional Office, that's fine, in case you have meetings there.
Is he on like the third floors?
No, he's on the first floor. His window looks over at the school. It's, as far as sites go, this one was pretty convenient. So in the end, they did some work optimizing the subslab system, balancing the HVAC system. It probably was mostly confined there were more than underground utility corridors. It was more kind of some underground spaces that were not bigger than crawl spaces, and yet not necessarily known to the school or forgotten. And kind of what we spent a lot of time on was the communication not only with school, with the health department, with the industrial company that was conducting the work, but also obviously the parents, and with the timeline of making sure everybody felt confident when the school started again in September, that people felt confident and safe going to there. And that including having our fast vehicle go out and doing sampling, taking the samples and doing the analysis in the parking lot, and having those results with a quick turnaround so that we could go in and do a lot of immediate samples to give people a good sense of confidence that we had a good grasp on what was going on there. Another interesting thing, and maybe I'll have Mark come out one of these days and talk about this once it's gone to completion, but this is an interesting kind of unforeseen one. We had an old, cleaners, trichloroethylene, trichloroethylene, Nearby residents had high levels in drinking water well, great. You give a bottle of water, put in a treatment system, you sample the effluent from the treatment system that's coming out of it, great, non-detect. They sampled the water at the tap, and it was 64 micrograms per liter of TC. The indoor air, by the way, was okay. that was less of a problem than wrestling with it's non-detect coming out of the treatment system, but it's 64 micrograms per liter at the tap. What's going on? And the working theory is that this home has PVC piping, and that after what had been actually probably years of water being served through the PVC with contaminated water, that the TCE absorbed onto the piping and is now coming off at a nice steady rate. So the question is, what do you do in this case?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
You mentioned the indoor air. Did you do soil gas sampling at that house as well?
I don't know offhand.
Because I'd be interested, because I think
More-
I've seen PVC also serving as a source to soil gas, gassing from the piping. So I'd be interested in that.
Yeah, but we can, and like I said, this might be a good one to have Mark come and talk about, because it has been interesting. The residents had left the house, so there's no current exposure, but the question is now what needs to be done and who's going to pay for it. Yes?
Have you also tested the water for lead, given the high lead content of PVC stabilizer, particularly if it's a lower pH?
The question is whether we've tested the water for lead. I don't know. I'll go back and look and ask Mark. These are.
They may support the
This, I'm channeling this for the TCE side thing, but those are potential questions. That may be, may be a good indication of, again, that the stuff is leaching off the PVC. I think we're pretty confident at this point that that's where it's coming from. So the PVC piping is an issue. Having replaced pipes in my house, I've never realized you could use PVC for the inflow, the drinking water. Apparently you can.
Just a quick, you're saying the TCE is leaching from the piping itself or from the cement that they use?
That this piping had transported TCE contaminated water for years, and that it absorbed onto the PVC.
Into it or just onto the surface?
We don't know in that level of detail. But whether it's onto the surface or into it, it's now that we've eliminated the source, it's now leaching out that material.
I find it hard.
The question is, why don't you replace the piping?
Yeah.
Again, it's
Money.
what's to be done, and who's going to pay for it?
Home Depot.
But that's, and how long does that do that?
It's a long distance.
So those are things in the timing of it. But this is an interesting thing. Again, you're looking for TCE and indoor air, and we ran into a completely different problem. Northeast region, they have kind of 51 sites that are kind of on the various stages of investigation. Kind of 8 of those are now completely closed out and removed from, took off the actively assigned list. Their indoor air testing is slowed because they're really not doing it as much in the summer months, so we'll pick up again. A couple interesting ones, the former Chelsea Clock site, which is across the street from Chelsea High School. Is being redeveloped, and again, we can have another talk someday about what was used in clock faces?
Green.
Completely different story, not related to TCE, so it's not on the slide. But we were already involved in Chelsea Clock. And as they were opening up parts of the property and for the redevelopment, there was TCE in the ambient air that then was taken in by the HVAC system of the school across the street, creating exposures that were easily dealt with once recognized. So the excavation could be managed in a way to avoid that. But it's something that triggered a lot of short-term scurrying. Adjutant, yes. And former Ames Street Metal site, single-family homes redeveloped on the site, and DEP is installing sub-slab systems there, and we're probably going to be doing more work. So this is all part and parcel of this project, the types of things that we're working on. Zero, I meant to take that one out. I'm sorry, Gerard. We need an update from Southeast in time. So Gerard was on vacation last week, so They're doing work, it's just not reflected here. Okay.
They're all not on vacation.
No, but when you don't want to bother people by asking too many people to provide these updates because, quite frankly, it's annoying. They're doing real work. And it's awful when Boston, sends an email saying, can you give me a description of what you're doing?
They provided a big PFAS update.
They did provide an excellent PFAS update on it.
And they may have provided TCE, and I just didn't find them in the box.
So Southeast is working very hard. I know they are. I'm just not going to tell you about it. We'll surprise you next time.
Any questions?